Kieran Knox didn't usually walk his dog this late, but tonight, after a long meeting and a glass of scotch he hadn't really needed, he needed air more than sleep. The Manhattan skyline glittered behind him as he stepped out of his penthouse building, leash in hand, a sleepy golden retriever padding beside him. Max yawned and blinked up at him like this wasn't part of their usual schedule, because it wasn't. "Come on," Kieran said under his breath, adjusting the collar of his coat. "It's just a walk, you'll survive." Max gave a soft bark, unimpressed, but trotted ahead anyway, nose already sniffing for trouble. It was quiet on the street, rare for the city, but peaceful. The kind of quiet that made Kieran's thoughts louder. Thoughts about the last board meeting, the merger hanging by a thread, and that ridiculous article speculating about his love life. Again. He was halfway through the park when Max tugged hard on the leash, dragging him toward something or someone. Max, heel what the hell, a blur of motion, a loud crash, and an "oh" from behind a tree stopped him cold. Kieran rounded the corner and found her. A woman was sitting on the ground, tangled in a broken paper bag, groceries scattered everywhere. Max was already licking her cheek like she was his long-lost best friend. "Oh my God," she muttered, pushing the dog's face away with a laugh. "Hi, yes, hello, boundaries, I am so sorry," Kieran said quickly, stepping forward. "He's usually better behaved." The woman looked up at him, blinking, and for a second, Kieran forgot how to breathe. Dark curls framed her face, and she had this look like she was annoyed, amused, and a little bit tired all at once. Her eyes were sharp but kind. Her coat was thin, and her hands were trembling slightly from the cold. "Groceries are dead," she said, gesturing to the mess on the sidewalk. "But I'm alive, so you know, partial win." Kieran reached down and helped her to her feet without thinking. "Let me replace those," he said immediately. She raised an eyebrow. "You're offering to buy me groceries at midnight. I'm offering to fix what my dog ruined," he said simply. "I insist." She studied him for a beat, then looked down at Max, who was now sitting obediently beside her, tail wagging like crazy. "He's cute," she said, softening. "A menace, but cute." "He knows it," Kieran said, trying not to notice how warm her hand had been in his. "I'm Kieran, by the way." She hesitated, then said, Zadie Nolan." "Nice to meet you, Zadie Nolan." He glanced at the mess again. "Seriously, let me help." Zadie sighed dramatically. "Fine. But only because I don't have the energy to argue and I really need cereal." Kieran motioned toward the corner. "There's a 24-hour market 2 blocks from here." She gave him a skeptical look. "You walk strange women to supermarkets often," he shrugged. "Only the ones my dog attacks." Zadie let out a laugh and shook her head, and Kieran felt something shift in his chest. It was subtle, but there, they walked side by side, Max trotting happily between them. Kieran watched her out of the corner of his eye. She was easy to talk to, funny, sarcastic without being mean. She told him she worked at a small art gallery, recently laid off, and was picking up shifts at a nearby diner to make ends meet. "Sounds glamorous, I know," she said, tossing a box of cereal into her basket. "But hey, at least I get free coffee." "Better than half the boardrooms I sit in," Kieran said, grabbing a bag of dog treats for Max. Zadie gave him a look. "Boardrooms," he nodded. "I run a few companies." "Ah," she said with a teasing smile. "So you're one of those." "One of what?" "Rich guy walking his dog at midnight trying to look normal," he laughed. "Busted." Outside, the city air had turned colder. Kieran handed the clerk his black card without blinking and carried her bag without asking. Zadie didn't comment on the card, but the way she glanced at it told him she noticed. They walked back to where they'd met. She lived in a small walk-up just around the corner, apparently. "Thanks for the rescue," she said, stopping at her door. "And the groceries?" "You're welcome," he said. "And again, sorry for the ambush." Zadie leaned against the doorframe, her smile soft now. "It's not every night I get tackled by a golden retriever and walked to the store by a mystery man in a Burberry coat." Kieran chuckled. "It's not every night I meet someone who calls my dog a menace and still agrees to cereal." "I'm full of surprises," she said, then hesitated. "You wanna maybe walk him again tomorrow night?" Kieran didn't even have to think. "Yeah, I'd like that." She smiled and started up the steps. "Good. Max is cute. You're tolerable. You wound me. I'll bring dog treats, she called over her shoulder. For Max, not for you. Kieran watched her disappear upstairs, something strange and unfamiliar blooming in his chest. He hadn't expected anything tonight. He'd just taken his dog for a late walk. But somehow, Zadie Nolan had already started to own a piece of him, and he wasn't sure he wanted it back. Kieran didn't usually rearrange his schedule for anyone. But the next night, he left his office before 9, something that hadn't happened in over a year, and found himself standing outside Zadie's apartment building with Max tugging at the leash, tail already wagging like he knew exactly what they were waiting for. He didn't text, didn't call. He just waited, unsure if she'd even remember. But then the door opened, and there she was wearing a denim jacket over a faded hoodie, a canvas tote slung over one shoulder, and a red bandana tied loosely in her hair. She looked completely unlike anyone who ever walked into his world. "Thought I'd missed you," she said, stepping onto the sidewalk. "I wouldn't have left yet," Kieran answered, handing Max the lead while she adjusted her bag. "He wouldn't have let me." Zadie let Max set the pace as they turned toward the quieter side streets, and Kieran fell in beside her. There was a different rhythm to walking with her, no small talk just for the sake of it, no forced politeness. It was easy even in silence. "So," she said eventually, glancing over, "do you always keep dog biscuits in your coat pocket, or am I just that lucky?" "He's got me trained," Kieran said. "I respond well to guilt," Zadie laughed, and this time it was brighter, less guarded than the night before. "You don't seem guilty, you seem like someone who's used to getting his way. Only when it matters." She tilted her head, considering. "And does this matter?" Kieran looked at her, the streetlight catching the curve of her cheek as she scratched behind Max's ear. "I'm still here, aren't I?" They turned the corner, and she stopped at a small shop window. It was closed, but the display was still lit handmade ceramics, painted in deep, moody colors. Zadie stared at them for a moment too long. "You like those?" Kieran asked. "I know the artist," she said. "We used to share studio space before." "Well, before I couldn't afford it anymore." He watched her face shift just slightly, not enough to be called sadness, but close. "You still make art," she shrugged. "Not lately. Minimum wage and night shifts don't leave much time for inspiration." "You should," Zadie turned to him. "That easy, huh?" "No," Kieran said. "But worth it." They kept walking, and the conversation shifted. She told him about a kid she used to mentor through the gallery's outreach program, a 14-year-old with a sketchbook full of dragons and a tendency to forget his own name when he was drawing. Kieran listened, genuinely interested, even as Max nosed along the curb beside them. "And you?" she asked suddenly. "You always this mysterious, or is that just a rich guy thing?" Kieran didn't answer right away. He wasn't used to questions that weren't trying to extract something: money, influence, access. But she didn't ask like that. She asked like she genuinely wanted to know. "My parents died when I was 20, he said finally, "left me their company. I was a business major who hadn't even learned how to file taxes yet. I made a lot of mistakes, but I didn't want anyone else controlling the legacy they built." Zadie blinked. "That's a lot to carry." It was. "Still is." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "I think people forget grief doesn't vanish, it just changes shape." Kieran stopped walking. She had no idea how right she was. "I haven't heard anyone say it like that before," he said. "I've had more practice with grief than I'd like," she replied, looking down at Max. "That's why I like dogs. They don't ask questions, they're just there." He watched her kneel to pet Max, and something about the way she moved, so gentle, so present, twisted something inside him. "Come on," he said, nodding toward the avenue. "I want to show you something." Zadie hesitated, then straightened. "You're not secretly a serial killer, are you? I own 3 companies and a dog who kisses strangers on sight. Not a great cover for murder." She laughed and followed. They walked past the main avenue, through an alley that opened up to an old rooftop garden. It had once been a restaurant, now closed, but the gate was still unlocked, and Kieran had donated enough to the building's owner to keep it well maintained. He pushed open the door and led her up 3 flights. When they reached the top, the city spread out around them like a painting: endless lights, soft wind, the sound of distant music carried on the breeze. Zadie stepped forward, stunned. "Okay," she whispered. "This is unbelievable. I come here to think or not think. She walked to the edge, her hands gripping the rusted railing. I've lived here for 6 years, and I didn't know this existed. Most don't. Kieran dropped onto a bench and let Max curl at his feet. Zadie didn't sit. She walked slowly along the edge, taking in every detail. This feels like a secret, she said. It is, Kieran replied. She turned then, facing him. Why show me? Kieran held her gaze. Because I wanted to. She didn't speak. But something shifted between them again, something unspoken, electric. Then Zadie walked over and sat beside him, not too close, not too far. I haven't had a real day off in over 3 months, she said. Then take one. I can't afford to. I'll cover it. She turned her head quickly. No. That's not what this is. I know, he said. But what if it could be more? She stared at him like she was trying to figure out if he was serious, and he was. I don't know what you're doing, she said slowly, but I'm not some project. I'm not trying to fix you, Kieran said. I just want to know you. Zadie looked away again, out at the city. You're used to people saying yes to you. Maybe, he admitted, but I'd rather earn it. She didn't answer, but she didn't move either. They sat there like that, with Max breathing softly between them, and the skyline glowing around them like the closing scene of a film neither of them had expected to be in. And for the first time in a long time, Kieran wasn't thinking about mergers or headlines or what came next. He was thinking about her and how nothing about her felt temporary. The first time Kieran showed up at the diner where Zadie worked, he wore a graphite wool coat, no tie, and an expression that dared anyone to question why a man like him was sitting in a cracked vinyl booth surrounded by the scent of burnt coffee and scrambled eggs. He didn't say anything when she approached, just handed her a napkin with a single word written on it. Lemon. Zadie narrowed her eyes. Is this code for something? You said you liked lemon tarts, he replied. I brought one. He slid a small white box across the table, from LaRue. The pastry chef is a friend. She stared at the box, then at him. You're bribing me with dessert. I'm investing in your attention. Zadie folded her arms, but there was a flush rising in her cheeks, one she didn't bother to hide. You know I make minimum wage, right? You could have just waited until my shift ended. I was curious what you looked like behind a counter. She flicked her towel over her shoulder and muttered, like someone who's been awake since 6 a.m., You look like someone who doesn't belong here. Careful, she said. That almost sounded like a compliment and an insult at the same time. Kieran leaned back. It was both. Zadie didn't linger. She took his order, black coffee, no sugar, and vanished behind the counter. But every time she passed his booth, she glanced over like she wasn't sure if she wanted him to stay or disappear. He didn't leave. The second time it happened, it was raining. Not the soft kind that whispered against windows, but the kind that soaked through coats and made even taxis pull over. Kieran showed up at her building, Max in tow, both of them damp and miserable. Zadie opened the door in mismatched socks and a threadbare sweater, blinking at him like he'd lost his mind. You do realize there's a storm, right? Max gave a low whine and shook rain all over her floor. I noticed, Kieran said, unbothered, but I thought you might need groceries again. She blinked. You're using a natural disaster as an excuse to hang out with me? No, he said. I'm using it as an excuse to see you again. She didn't move aside, but she didn't close the door either. There's no power, she said. I was about to make soup over a candle. Sounds romantic. I was going to eat it alone. Now you're not. Zadie stared at him for a long moment, then stepped back. The apartment was small, lived in, and filled with things that didn't match. An old armchair with a patch sewn into the cushion. Books stacked in places where shelves should have been. An easel in the corner draped in a paint-streaked drop cloth. The electricity was out, but candles flickered on the windowsills, their light casting long shadows. She handed him a towel. You're drying the dog. Kieran knelt and did exactly that. By the time the soup was bubbling on her camping stove, she was sitting cross-legged on the floor and he was beside her, sharing the folded quilt she'd pulled from the couch. Max curled up by the radiator, belly full, tail twitching in his sleep. Zadie sipped from her mug and said, You're not what I expected when I saw you in that coat. You're not what I expected when I fell over your cereal. She laughed quietly, then looked at him. Why me? Kieran didn't answer right away. He set his mug down, letting the silence stretch. Because I don't have to pretend with you, he said finally. Everyone in my world wants something, you don't. That's not entirely true, she said. I want a space to paint again. I want to sleep 8 hours without worrying if rent will overdraft my account. I want to stop feeling like I'm one bad shift away from falling apart. He didn't try to fix it, he just listened. I could help, he said. No, Zadie, I mean it, she interrupted. Don't turn this into a transaction. I don't want to wonder if you're here because you see me or because you see someone you can rescue. I don't want to rescue you, Kieran said. I want to know you, all of you, even the parts you think are too messy. Her jaw tightened. I don't know how to trust that. He reached over and gently touched her hand, not a grip, just contact. His voice didn't rise. Then let me show you. The candles flickered. The storm outside shuddered against the windows, and for the first time in a long time, Zadie didn't pull away. The next morning, she woke up on the couch, quilt tangled around her legs, the faint smell of coffee in the kitchen. Kieran had left a note on the counter in his elegant, impossible handwriting. It said, Max ate one of your socks, I'll replace it. Also, I left paint. She stepped into the corner of the apartment where the easel stood. On the floor beside it was a heavy wooden box. Inside, tubes of oil paint, brushes, palettes, a fresh set of charcoal pencils, and a worn leather sketchbook with her initials embossed in gold. Zadie stared at it for a long time, not because she was overwhelmed or suspicious or confused, but because no one had ever known how to give her exactly what she needed without asking for anything in return. And somehow, Kieran Knox, billionaire, boardroom shark, and completely out of place in her world, had done exactly that. She picked up the sketchbook, dragged her chair to the window, and opened it. For the first time in months, she began to draw. Zadie stood in front of the mirror, her fingers brushing over the necklace lying against her collarbone delicate gold, a single opal at the center. She hadn't noticed Kieran slipping it into her coat pocket until she'd found the box that morning, tucked between a folded scarf and a note written on fine stationery. For no reason except that I thought of you when I saw it. She'd stared at it for minutes, unsure if she was more afraid of what it meant or how easily she wanted to accept it. Now, 2 weeks later, she was standing in the lobby of the gallery she used to work at. Only this time, it wasn't as an employee. Her artwork hung on the far wall, framed and lit by soft, ambient spotlights. The invitation-only showcase buzzed with voices, champagne flutes chiming, and the low hum of a string quartet near the entrance. She hadn't told Kieran she'd submitted her work. She wanted to do it on her own terms. But when she stepped through the side curtain into the main space, her eyes locked onto his. He was across the room, dressed in slate gray, the tie gone, the top button undone. People gathered near him, hovering, waiting, but he wasn't looking at any of them. His focus was only on her. You didn't say anything, he said when she reached him. I wasn't sure it would happen. You doubted yourself, he said. I didn't, she took a breath. I didn't want you to think I used you to get here. His brows lifted slightly. Why would I think that? Because no one else would have believed in me like you did. I didn't get you here, Zadie. You did that. I just stood back and watched. She looked around at the people admiring her work, the gallery director speaking with a collector by the sculpture wall, the small red sticker already beside one of her paintings. I don't know what to do with this feeling. What feeling? That I might actually be okay, she said. That maybe I have a future again. Kieran held out his hand, not demanding, just an offering. Then let's figure out what that future looks like. Together. She placed her fingers against his palm, warm, steady, and let him guide her back into the room. Later, as the night thinned and the guests dwindled, Kieran led her upstairs to the rooftop above the gallery. This one wasn't hidden or forgotten, but it was quieter, wrapped in climbing ivy and soft string lights swaying in the breeze. He'd arranged it without telling her. A table stood under a canopy of twinkling bulbs, a bottle of wine, 2 glasses, a plate of chocolate-dipped strawberries. She turned to him, stunned. You did all this? I thought you might need a quiet moment after the chaos. Her throat tightened. You think of everything? No, he said, just you. They sat at the table, the city humming gently around them. She took a sip of wine, the glass trembling slightly in her hand. He noticed but didn't comment. "You scare me a little," she said suddenly. "Why?" "Because this feels real, and I've never had something real last." Kieran reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. "Then let's make this the exception." She studied him, really studied him. The man who had walked into her life with a dog and a quiet confidence that made it easy to forget everything else. The man who hadn't tried to change her, just see her. "I don't need grand gestures," she said. "I know," he answered. "But I'm going to keep making them anyway, not because I think I need to earn you, but because I want to remind you that you matter." Her voice was quiet. "You already have." He stood then, pulling something from his coat pocket, not a ring. A key. "What's that?" "A choice," he said. "There's a space in my building. Used to be a studio. It has skylights and terrible acoustics, so it's perfect for painting. It's been locked up for years. I'm offering it to you. No rent, no strings." Zadie stared at it. "I'm not asking you to move in," he said. "I'm not asking anything except for you to have a place where you can create without fear." She reached out slowly and took the key. "I want to say something poetic," she said, "but all I can think is, thank you. That's more than enough." They stood together under the lights, the city below them, and when he pulled her into a slow, quiet kiss, it wasn't urgent or possessive. It was steady, sure, like the promise it carried didn't need to be spoken aloud. 2 months later, the studio was filled with canvases, some half-finished, some explosive with color. And in the far corner, a dog bed where Max now spent his afternoons curled up in a patch of sunlight. Kieran came by every day, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with nothing but time. Zadie sold 3 more pieces, then 5. Then was offered a commission by a Manhattan hotel chain when she told him he didn't try to make it about what he'd done. He just kissed her, held her face in his hands, and said, "I told you." One night, after a gallery dinner, he walked her through Central Park, Max darting ahead in the darkness. "You remember the night we met?" she asked, looping her arm through his. "I was never going to forget it. I didn't know then that I was meeting the man who'd change everything." Kieran stopped walking. His expression shifted, something deeper than affection, more grounded than infatuation. "I didn't know," he said, "that I was meeting the woman who'd make everything else matter." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a sketch of him and Max sitting on the rooftop. She'd drawn it weeks ago but hadn't known when to give it. "I made this for you," she said, "because I wanted you to have something that reminded you who you really are when no one's watching." He unfolded it slowly, carefully, then looked up at her. "You already gave me that," he said. "The first night I met you." That was the moment she knew it wasn't a question of whether they'd last. It was simply a matter of how far their future would stretch, and the answer, as far as she could see, was forever. The morning of the gala, Zadie stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in the dressing suite of the Corinthian Hotel, the hem of her gown pooling like liquid bronze around her feet. Kieran had sent a car, a stylist, and a woman named Claire who insisted on calling her darling while adjusting the final curl of her hair. Zadie had tried to protest the extravagance, but Claire had waved her off with a dramatic flick of a makeup brush and said, "You're the woman he's bringing to the most exclusive charity gala in the city. You'll walk in looking like art, or I'll lose my license." She wasn't used to gowns that fit like second skin or earrings that glittered like tiny stars. But the moment she stepped out of the suite and into the private elevator where Kieran was waiting, she forgot every insecurity. He didn't say anything right away. He didn't need to. His gaze moved over her slowly, reverently, as if he was memorizing every single detail. Then he reached out, took her hand, and said quietly, "You look like you were made to ruin me." The gala was held at the Glass House, a venue suspended above the Hudson, its walls completely transparent. The skyline shimmered on either side, and chandeliers floated like constellations above the crowd. Kieran's name was listed as the primary sponsor, but he barely acknowledged the attention. His focus remained on her. They moved through the crowd like they were tethered. Every time someone tried to pull him away, an investor, a board member, a whispering heiress with painted lips, he'd only give a tight nod. then turned back to Zadie like she was the only person who mattered in the room. Near the bar, a man with a clipped accent and polished shoes leaned toward her. "You're the artist from the Langley showcase," he said. "Knox has good taste." Zadie lifted her chin slightly. "I have a name." The man blinked, momentarily thrown. "Of course. She's not an accessory," Kieran said, stepping beside her. "She's the reason I'm here tonight at all." Later, on the balcony that overlooked the river, Zadie leaned against the railing, the night breeze lifting the fine strands of her hair. "I didn't realize how many people expect something from you," she said. "They all want a piece of the empire," Kieran answered, "but none of them understand it means nothing if I'm building it alone." She turned to face him. "And you're not." "No," he said, "not anymore." A string quartet played behind them, the music drifting into the night air. Kieran pulled something from his pocket, a small envelope. He handed it to her without ceremony, his expression unreadable. She opened it. Inside was a deed, not to an apartment, not to a studio, to a gallery. Her name was listed as the owner. Zadie's breath caught. "What is this?" "A space." "Your space," he said. "On West 73rd, it's been empty for years. I had it gutted and renovated. Skylights, exposed brick, the works. You decide what it becomes. A gallery, a studio, a collective, whatever you want." She stared at him, speechless. "I didn't do this to impress you," he continued. "I did it because your work deserves to be seen, and because I believe in what you create. I always have." Tears burned in her eyes, but she blinked them away. "Are you trying to ruin every other man for me, Knox?" He stepped closer, his voice low and sure. "I'm trying to be the only man." She kissed him then, not because the moment demanded it, but because everything inside her ached to. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the windows of her new gallery. Zadie stood barefoot on the polished hardwood floors, the scent of fresh paint still lingering. Kieran held a mug of coffee. Max sprawled at their feet, tail twitching in his sleep. "You know what I realized last night," Zadie said. "What?" "I never once asked what you wanted from me. Not really." He set the mug down and pulled her into his arms. "I want your mornings, I want your messes and your triumphs. I want to walk through every storm with you, even if you don't need an umbrella." "That's poetic," she said, resting her head against his chest. "I've been practicing," he whispered. They spent the day filling the space with her work. Canvases leaned against the walls, a few still unfinished. She painted while he read, occasionally glancing up just to watch her. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer advice. He was simply there. That night they ate takeout on the gallery floor, still barefoot, paint on her cheek and soy sauce on his sleeve. "I used to think love had to be loud to be real," she said. "What do you think now?" "I think it just has to be steady and honest and terrifying in the best way." "You terrify me every day," he said. "Good." 2 weeks later, Zadie's gallery opened, the line wrapped around the block. Her work sold out in under 2 hours. She donated a portion of the proceeds to a local youth art program and hired 2 young artists to help curate future exhibits. Kieran stayed behind the scenes, by her choice and his. He didn't want credit. He just wanted to see her light up when someone paused too long in front of her favorite piece. That night, when they returned to his place, their place now, though they kept her apartment as a studio annex, he handed her a small box. Inside was a ring, no speech, no fanfare. Just him kneeling in front of her, eyes steady. "I don't need a grand moment," she said through a laugh-choked breath, "because every moment with you already is." "Still," he said softly, "I wanted to ask." She nodded, tears slipping free. "Yes." A year later, the gallery was thriving. Zadie's name was synonymous with raw, emotional storytelling through art. She led workshops, mentored young creators, and had co-curated an international exhibition. Kieran expanded his empire subtly, quietly, always returning home to her. They married in a private garden in Italy, surrounded by only the people who mattered. No press. No announcements, just whispered vows and a kiss under a canopy of olive trees. Max wore a bow tie and stole half the cake. That night they lay in bed, the windows open to the sound of cicadas. Zadie traced the line of Kieran's jaw, her fingers featherlight. "Did you ever think," she murmured, "that falling for a girl with a broken grocery bag would lead here?" He smiled, slow and sure. "No. But it's the only thing that's ever made sense." They drifted to sleep like that, tangled together, a painting half finished in the back of her mind, and the promise of forever already drying into the canvas of their life.